Thank you, everybody, for being here, to the Goethe Institute for the lovely place that we are in today, and of course to Ambassador Pence for being here. And welcome to all of the studio audience who are guests and friends of Finlandia Foundation from the area, from our local chapter, from our national board, other friends of mine who are interested in international topics, friends of Georgetown are here as well. So we're glad to have the audience we have tonight in this space. And above all, Ambassador Pence. This is really a new and exciting opportunity for Finlandia Foundation National to actually sit down with a former U.S. diplomat and talk about our favorite topic, Finland. So I'm Tommy Flanagan. I'm the executive director of the Finlandia Foundation National. I wanted to tell you just briefly about the organization because some of you may not know who we are. In this year, in 2023, we are celebrating our 70th anniversary of being what we call fiercely Finnish since 1953. Our mission is to champion our culture and heritage across the United States by supporting educational opportunities and promoting diverse, relevant, and enriching programs. And this program tonight, I think, definitely qualifies as one of our enriching programs. At the center of our work is our grants and our scholarships program. Each year, we award around $300,000 to students and members of the Finnish American community for educational purposes or planning of Finnish American related events. We have nearly 60 locally affiliated Finlandia chapters across the United States and also run a pretty robust annual program that we call Lecturer of the Year, Performer of the Year, and Artist of the Year, where we highlight Finnish or Finnish American people making contributions in the U.S. in those industries. Without further ado, I want to introduce our guest of honor tonight, Ambassador Robert Pence. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Finland, serving in that role from 2018 to 2021. Prior to his service as ambassador, Mr. Pence founded and chaired the board of the Pence Group, a full-service development company. He also served on the boards of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the Wolf Trap Foundation, the World Affairs Council, George Mason University, and American University. Ambassador Pence earned his BA from the University of Maryland and a JD degree and 2 MA degrees from American University, and an MPhil and MA degrees from Yale University. He has studied Italian, French, Latin, and Greek, and a little bit of Finnish. Ambassador Pence is also has also lectured at Georgetown University and was teaching fellow at Yale University. Ambassador Pence currently serves on the board of the Gary Sinise Foundation, which serves our nation by honoring our defenders, veterans, first responders and their families, and those in need by creating and supporting unique programs designed to entertain, educate, inspire, strengthen, and build communities. So on behalf of the Finlandia Foundation National, join me in welcoming Ambassador Pence. So thank you so much for being here, Ambassador. And I really don't need to set the context for you at all, and probably nobody in this room, but Finland has certainly been on the rise in national news as of late, right? We've had NATO. We just recently had a Eurovision upset or victory, however you want to look at that. Prime Minister Sanna Marin was, as well as Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto were recently in the U.S. giving commencement speeches, the focus on gender equality. President Niinistö has been here 4 times in the past couple years. Education, AI, digital economy, sustainability, and of course being named the happiest country for 6 years in a row. Finland is on everybody's mind. So that's why we're here, to take advantage of your perspective of what you learned while you were in Finland. So I guess the first question everyone asks you probably is, did you ever think that you were going to become an ambassador?
Yes and no. I guess everyone who's involved in politics has some dream and sees their friends going and becoming ambassadors someplace in the world. I was no different, and had some other candidates won election. I might have been one sooner someplace else. So I never set out with the program to be an ambassador. And so when I was finally asked by President Trump, by the White House, I was surprised. I was very surprised that it was Finland, pleasantly surprised. And so that immediately engendered both in me and my wife, Susie, a desire to know a lot more, everything we could come to know about Finland and its people and its culture and its history.
And had you actually ever been to Finland before you became the U.S. ambassador to Finland?
Well, we were there twice, actually. And the first time, actually, on a cruise, so we had a full day, and a rock church and all. And it was really a very exceptional experience. It's not a large city. It's rather compact compared to what it used to, but it's filled with gems, large and small. The second time, quite frankly, I was working. One of the things that my wife and I do, you alluded to it in part, is we do a lot of things to entertain troops, American troops around the world, domestically and abroad. And we started doing it with the Beach Boys. So in about 2007, 2008, I began to work on a tour with the Beach Boys, and we were going to go through the Baltic and end up in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And so I was able to pick sites in all the early countries, and I even had one in St. Petersburg and one in Moscow, and it was going splendidly until it came time for me to exit from Moscow and get on a plane, and I had a very hard time with the Russians doing that. And I got on the plane and I said, I'm never coming back to this country. And I haven't been back. And I'll stay with that one. So those were the two times before, and I guess I can segue into the beginning of this time, if that's okay with you. And so I was asked about going to Finland, and I was actually at a lacrosse game for one of my granddaughters. And I said, let me think about it, and because the game was intense, and went home, told my wife. She said, wow, Finland. And so we talked about it, and the next day or two later, I called the White House back, and I said, I'll give you a 95% yes, but you have to do something that I know the White House never likes to do. What's that? My wife and I want to go to Finland before I give you the final answer, because I need to find out if we can find enough food, if I can find enough food and restaurants to, I'm very serious. I'm a finicky eater. And the answer became, in 3 nights there, 4 days, 3 nights there, and they said, yes, you may go. You can't tell anybody. You can't go to the embassy. You were not there. You were invisible. And so we went and we came back. We didn't talk about it on the plane or when we got back. And after about 3 days, on the Sunday morning, we looked at each other, and I don't know which one of us said it, but one of us said, let's go. And that was it. Sunday noon, I called the White House person and said, we're on. She said, call me tomorrow. And so we did, and voila, and it took about a year or two to get there. So on my birthday in 2018, May the 17th precisely, date I always remember, we got on a plane to Helsinki. It was the first time in my life that I was going to live in a place other than the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I went to Yale, up and back, Monday, Wednesday, Stanford, Monday, Friday for a semester, but never to live in another place. And I had never for sure gotten on a plane without a return ticket. So when the door shut and they spun up the engines and away we went, I had a very eerie feeling because I'd never had that sensation of going to live in a place other than the Washington, D.C. and the metro environs. What followed was almost 3 years of splendor.
Well, yeah, that's great. They say that people usually book tickets to Finland one way because it's so happy. So, that makes sense. What were your first impressions of the Finns when you got to Finland? What do you remember kind of thinking first, right off the bat, about what are these people, kind of what makes them tick?
My first impressions of the Finns were the staff and the residents. I had to back up when the plane doors opened. And your Minister of Protocol was there. There was a security detail there. My DCM was there, and my RSO, Regional Security Officer, was there. And they were all like Are they going to take me somewhere? Are they going to arrest me? What are these people going to do? And then we went to the residence, which is on the grounds of the embassy compound, a beautiful building, very modest, about 12,000 square feet, I think, with a sauna for 12 to 15, big enough for the Pence family and friends. The introduction to the staff, the chef in the residence, the staff, a small staff, super efficient, lovely. The housekeeper had actually had worked for the Finnish government for some number of years, including here, when she was raising her one or two sons, and she worked here. And the chef was a chef of long standing in the residence. So it was a median. First time I'd ever lived in a place where everybody was there to serve me and I didn't have to worry about doing this and that. They were extremely welcoming. Everyone was extremely welcoming. And to continue with the question, I got there on the 18th, and the following, I guess it was a Friday, they marked the 100th anniversary of the Finnish Foreign Service. So there was a big event in Finlandia Hall. Now, I knew even before that event, the State Department rushed me to get there so that I could present my credentials to President Niinistö. In going to the presidential palace to present my credentials to the president, and my chief of staff had said, well, you're going to be the last of 4 in the morning. I said, that seems a little strange. She said, no, the president will give the other 3 about 5 minutes and you'll get 10 minutes. I thought, cool. And so I presented my credentials to President Niinistö in the presidential palace. He welcomed me. He took them, said, please tell the president that we've accepted them, or I've accepted them. Come in and sit down, let's have a coffee. And here's what happened. We went into his inner sanctum, exchanged a few pleasantries. He said, let me tell you about one thing that you need to know about being the American ambassador in Finland. He said, let me tell you about dealing with the Russians. And it wasn't the usual, a Russian is a Russian even if it's not that one. But he told me a phrase that I subsequently heard him say 3 or 4 times. Even though I heard him say it publicly later, I'm not going to repeat it for the benefit of my large sitting audience. Thank you for coming out. And by the way, thank you, Finlandia Foundation, for inviting me here tonight. So we talked about Russia for a little bit. And then he looked at me, and I was stunned because he said this, tell me about Dante, the man who wrote the Divine Comedy. He looked at me with a straight face. He said, tell me about Dante. And here's what I did. How much time do you have, Mr. President? And he said, all the time you want. And so we went on. And I started, and there's no preparation for this question, for that question, or a response. And I thought for about 10 seconds, and I said this. I'm writing my dissertation about Dante and Cicero, the great Roman philosopher. And I'll answer your question in terms of friendship. It's extremely important to both of those writers. Friendship between individuals, friendship within families, within communities, within states, within countries, around the world. Friendship. And my goal here is to preserve and enhance as much as I can the friendship between the United States of America and the Republic of Finland. And I said, and when I think I cannot continue to do that or improve upon that, we'll take your leave and I'll go home. It took a presidential election to get me out of there. So that's how it started with my relations with presenting my credentials. Now, they rushed me there because they wanted to rush me back and actually get some more of my clothes. And they did all this process so that I could go to the big annual NATO meeting the following week. And so that's how it started. Simple as that, except for the part of when we went to Finlandia Hall, and there was a big ceremony, and President Niinistö was there. And speaking of art and music, I heard a voice singing. It was incredible. I thought it was Adele singing Skyfall, and it was Ida-Lena singing. And we've probably done, my wife and I probably done half a dozen things with her, including we had her here. Valentine's Day, we flew her here to perform in our apartment with an American singer. So, but she really, I couldn't believe she was there performing live, which immediately instilled in us, and I love music, my wife loves music, instilled in us a love of Finnish music, with which I was, no offense, Mr. Sibelius, but with which I was not familiar. And that really began our love affair with things musical/Finnish.
Well, that's a good segue into the next question, actually, about describing the Finnish character. I mean, you've kind of described your first interactions. You've hinted at music now. Is there anything that you would say about what describes the Finnish character, if there is anything, and how is that actually relevant in today's world?
Well, let's start with sisu. And that's a word that I use often. And I learned it when I was going through ambassadorial school. I like to read, so I read up on it. And I came to my American definition of sisu. Sisu is Emersonian self-reliance on steroids. And I believe that with all my heart. I said it last night to a big audience in, believe it or not, Rochester, New York. Independent, gutsy, self-reliant, with a sense of values and propriety that they live. And after I said that in Finland, I had to go back and reread the essay on self-reliance. I wasn't wrong. And the one thing I was not prepared for was that the Finns seem to have, and I do believe you have, this is not a criticism, a sense of social propriety, distance between individuals that Americans really don't have. The Asians, I've known for a long time, they have a very strict sense of physical positioning, if you will. And the Finns were, and I still believe are, have a mindful appreciation. And my wife told a joke to some people last night about the pandemic, because we were in Finland when the pandemic hit. And I talk about that all the time. The schools didn't close, the bars didn't close. We went to the movies every Friday night, got our pop guy, treated her to popcorn and soda, big spender. And the pandemic hit, all those things were open. The kids were in school. The only time we had to wear a mask, when we had to start wearing masks, was if you went and got on the tram system, the subway. We didn't do the subway. For a long time while we were there, by the way, the two of us would just stroll out the door, blow by the guards, and away we would go somewhere. About halfway through, that stopped. And I know why it stopped. And then we had somebody from the embassy, and we had your security people with us in one or two cars everywhere we went. So we still walk down the street hand in hand. I mean, I've only been married 55 years to almost in 2 weeks to her, but all of a sudden to be watched and watching, I'm very cognizant of what's going on around me, which I never worried about before. Independence, sincere. So the joke my wife told, excuse me for digressing again already. And she said last night, we were so glad, the Finns were so glad when the pandemic was over, because they didn't have to adhere to the 6-foot rule between people. They could go back to the old 8-foot rule. Now, I looked at my wife like, hey, oikein hyvä, this is really good.
Yeah, well, that's definitely rings true for me in my experience of Finns as well. And all of the things that you said about sisu, of course, that's a huge part of the Finnish character. And I like your definition of it, connecting it, not just to getting through and persevering, but also connecting it to values, like you just said. So I think that's actually a really good qualifier. So thanks for your thoughts on that. So we've heard you arrived at the embassy in Helsinki, of course, the Finnish capital, the most urban area, but you probably spent time in other parts of the country. I don't know that specifically, but maybe you got out of the capital area. So what were some of the other parts of Finland that you maybe saw? What were your observations of those places?
Well, as a preamble to answering that question, before Susie and I left, we had made a commitment to each other. We were not going to stay holed up, not the ones holed up in the modest accommodations on the embassy compound or in Helsinki. But we said, we're going to get out and we're going to explore the country. We're going to meet the people. We're going to tell people what America is about and the things, and learn those areas of interaction, business, social. And so before we left, we said, our goal is 1 weekend a month. We're going someplace in Finland, someplace outside of Helsinki. Going around, we went to the Åland Islands twice. We met with the governor, met with the speaker of the house, a man and a woman respectively. We went there once for an event, can't recall what it was. We did not go in the casino. We spent maybe 2 nights and 3 days there. And just going around, we went to Rauma, going without any particular area, Oulu, and up over the top into, I know I'm missing a lot of places, but up over the top, Inari, Ivla. We went up there on vacation, and one other time we took our family up there for a week over Christmas and New Year's. And down the east side, Joensuu, Lappeenranta. I'll come back to Lappeenranta in a minute. And then on down the east and Porvoo and back in. And Kuopio, where one of my favorite restaurants is, an Italian restaurant. I won't embarrass anybody by making people feel like they aren't the best Italian restaurant in the Kuopio. We also did is, I did a lot of travels with embassy staff and your Ministry of Foreign Service around the country, meeting with councils and having a lot of fun doing it. I think it was Kuopio who won the national title in football, soccer. And on the way up there, my public affairs guy said something about it. I said, we need to stop in a store. How many people are there on the city council? He said, let's say 8. And I said, well, let's stop and let's just agree it was 8 soccer balls. And I put the score down and the date, and I autographed it. And when we went into the room, meet the mayor, I picked up the first one out of the bag and threw it at him. So that kind of broke the ice and went around and passed them all around. But that was the way. When we went to Oulu, we went down into the mines, 1,500 feet underground. And when we went to Lappeenranta, and this ties in, it does tie in with our emphasis in our life. My wife's father was an American Marine from Guadalcanal to Okinawa in the Pacific, and obviously lived to tell about it. And so we went to Lappeenranta. There was an event. There was a ceremony for the reburial of 50 Finnish soldiers whose body and portions thereof had been recovered from the Eastern Front, and they were going to be reburied in Lappeenranta. So I asked my defense attaché, will you see if we can get an invitation, if I could go, if Susie and I could go? And they said yes, and we went, and 2 things happened. Well, one thing happened that happened twice that I wasn't expecting. There was a reporter there who questioned, I'll be gentle, questioned why I was there. You didn't fight with us, you didn't, etc. and someone else shouted some questions. My answer to the reporter, and I didn't give so much of an answer to the individual, but my answer was simple. I'm here to pay the respects of America to citizens, the people who defended the Republic of Finland in a war. That's why I'm here. 1653, the great-grandfather of one John Morton, everybody know him, or some of you know him, John Morton, immigrated from Sweden, from the part of Sweden which were later in Finland, to the United States. And that individual's great-grandson settled in Pennsylvania, what is now Delaware County, and he did lots of things. By the way, the family name was not Morton, but it was changed over the years. John Morton, one of the members of the Pennsylvania delegation, the states, the 13 states to be at the time, original states, were deadlocked 6-6 on whether or not to ratify the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. It came down to the Pennsylvania delegation. The vote was 2-2. Benjamin Franklin was with the person and casting positive votes. There were two others, and there was one vote left. And the day before the final vote was to be taken, one John Morton said, I'm going to vote for it. So he became the deciding vote in the deciding state that passed the United States Declaration of Independence. Now, there's a bedroom, a suite in the ambassador's residence. There's the ambassador's suite, the presidential suite, and the John Morton suite.
Well, I mean, you more than answered that question, and I thank you for that, because and that kind of thing about Morton, I mean, the Finnish-American connection, that's really what the Finlandia Foundation National kind of is really all about, that history specifically. So we love to hear you tell that story, and have heard that story retold. So that's fantastic, and to know that it's also a suite in the embassy there, that's how important that is, and I don't know how many people in the general public would know that background, but I think it's great that you were able to articulate that. So,
if I may.
Yes, absolutely you may.
On that general theme, here's something that almost no Finn knew, and that is this, because I never had the honor of serving in the American military. But there came a time when we left that through reading and otherwise, I became aware that there were 6 men who were born in Finland, came to the United States of America, joined the military at various times in our history, and subsequently received the Medal of Honor. 6. One for the Civil War, which was the war in which the Medal of Honor was the United States of America's highest medal for military service. One in the Civil War, 2 or 3 in the Spanish-American War, which is 1898, 1999 in Cuba. 1 in the Boxer Rebellion, which was in a short-fought battle in China, and 1 in World War I. And by the way, when we went to the Medal of Honor Society, I think they're in Atlanta, to verify, at the time we thought there were 5. Our inquiry found this 6th one. Of the 6, one of them, John Eaglet, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery and you looking at the Tomb of the Unknown, and down to the hill to the left, there's an area of headstones. The bodies are not buried there, they're elsewhere. In the case of John Eaglet, he didn't die at Havana Harbor, but he died subsequently in sea in a ship, the USS Nashville, off the coast of Virginia. But it has a memorial stone in a section, very hallowed section. They're all hallowed sections at Arlington National Cemetery. So almost no one knows that. And anyway.
Well, I think it's fantastic that you were able to connect to the history so deeply, because that's such an important thing. It's a value that we have at the foundation as well, is really valuing the history of where we've been to kind of know where we're going, and all of those are really good reminders of that. But I do want to take you in another direction. I want to take you back to your time as ambassador in Helsinki between 2018 to 21, and especially in today's view and in hindsight, that particular time was a very essential time for Finland and for Europe, and the relationship of Finland to the U.S. and with thinking about NATO in the years that came after that. So, what were the major topics that you were dealing with as ambassador at that time?
Well, first, and I'll be very brief about this one, is the business situation relationship between Finland and the United States. I could go on for longer, but I'm not going to. But Finland had just opened a $360 million tire plant in the suburb of Nashville. Konecranes, big Finnish company, has 2 U.S. operations, one in Springfield and one in, I think, San Antonio or Austin. Bank certainly heavy banking between the 2 countries. Food, lots of food. Back and forth, and then there's the question of military relationship, which when I went, the United States and Finland had a long, close relationship on military issues. Only recently, this year, did NATO accept, or Finland applied for and was accepted, applied for and was accepted as a member of NATO. But before that, for many years, Finland was an enhanced opportunity partner. In 1995, you all bought on 64, I think, F-18 Hornet jets made by the Boeing Corporation, which you're still flying. And so while I was there, the competition, which had started, became very heated for the Finnish procurement of a new generation of jet fighters. And there were 5 candidates, the French one, the Swedish one, the Eurofighter, and 2 from the United States, the Boeing Corporation and Lockheed Martin. And as time went by, flash to the end, Lockheed Martin won the competition. But I remember along the way, well, the F-35s are great airplanes. It's obviously a stealth airplane. But what goes in the planes, and if we want under the wings of the planes, is what makes the fighters or planes or any weapon system lethal. And witness, fast forward to the situation in Finland right now, in Ukraine right now, where Russia thought they had control of the skies from day one, and they don't. And they have a lot more of things they're throwing at Ukraine, but they're not dominant. And when the day comes when you start taking delivery, I think, of 62 fighters, it will be even more different. And I will say one of my greatest successes, was the White House. I asked the White House, and would they turn me loose and let me go into the Pentagon and meet with and into the Senate and into the Congress and meet with people and into all the agencies to try and secure the release of certain weapon systems that were on the Finnish shopping list.
Yeah, certainly business and military are kind of always on the list. It sounds like there were some big moments while you were ambassador there. Bring our attention to another big moment while you were there, when then President Trump met with Russian President Putin in the 2018 Helsinki Summit. And for that time, the attention of the world was pretty much focused on Helsinki. As a diplomat, what can you share about the preparation and follow-up of such a global event? And what is most memorable from that visit when you kind of think back on that and the lasting impacts that had on U.S.-Finland relations?
Well, as we say when we go to ambassador school and then the Senate, thank you for that question. I was a political appointee and proud of it. I'm also a business person, but I'm a one-and-done person as an ambassador. And so I had no other agenda other than 2-3 years of service to my country on the basis that I described before, of the relations between our two countries. That said, the middle of June, there were some whispers that there might be a meeting between the two presidents. Whispers became a little louder whispers and whatever. And there came a time, I think it was on the 26th of June, actually, I think was the date. And it came to a head, and there were phone calls all around, back and forth to state and embassies, and particularly two of them, Finland and Vienna, Austria. And by about the 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got the message in Helsinki that the summit would not be in Helsinki. What did I do? The only thing I could do, I called my wife in the residence, full 100 yards away, and I said, you need to pull out the Hendricks gin and pour me a glass, put some olives in, and I'll be there in a few minutes. It was 5 o'clock by then, come on. And I went in, she said, what's going on? And I said, the meeting is going someplace else. I've been told that, by the state that it's going to be someplace else. So we sat down, and the benefit of and I hope you all, whatever you do in your life and your age and your history and your future, is you get time where you can sit down with someone, spouse, other, son, whoever, who all, and have a quiet time to reflect in a moment of tranquility. And that night was one of those moments, and I wasn't unhappy. I was saddened that there was going to be a meeting and the president wasn't going to go there. After all, I had spent a lot of time studying the Helsinki Accords and a lot of other agreements, and I knew the importance of Finland to international diplomacy and to the United States of America. There's a picture in the residence right on the mantle. Maybe you saw it, of the negotiations of the Helsinki Accords. And Leonid Brezhnev was on the left with his squad down my dining room table, and President Ford's on the right. And so there's a picture, and the table is still there, and it's a small picture. I put it on the mantle because I didn't like it in the back room where nobody could see it. And so, some chagrined, and I was talking to my wife, and about 5:30 or 5:45, the phone rang, and it was my OMS, my assistant. And she said, you're going to get a call in 1/2 hour from right now. And I said, okay, who's calling? And she said, John Bolton and John Huntsman, who was then our ambassador to Russia. And I said, I'll be here. She said, don't go anywhere. I said, I'm not going. I got it. Hung up the phone, went back in the living room, and I looked at Susie, and I said, they're coming. They're coming here. They're not calling me to tell me, sorry, Bob, because I knew them both very well. We're still all very good friends. And at the duly appointed time, they called. I think they were on their way to Russia, traversing Europe, and they called and they said, on July the 16th, there will be a meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Helsinki. And I said, okay, what do I need to do? And he said, you all need to start putting this together. I said, okay, what are the ground rules? And John Bolton said to me, you can spend all the money you want to spend. And they said, tomorrow night, the secretary is going to call you. That would be Secretary Pompeo, and to go over some things and whatnot. And when I spoke with the secretary, I said, Mr. Secretary, it would be nice if you had given me more than about 3 or 4 weeks of on-the-job training before you sprung this on me. Because every diplomat, every embassy around the world has one thing they really want to have. They want to have a presidential visit. And almost nobody gets it. Just think about how many there are. And the question of having a summit is like otherworldly. And they were coming, and they came, and they met on Monday, and the president arrived on Sunday night. 747 pulled right down the tarmac to the end of the red carpet where Susie and I were waiting for him. Unbelievable. So my impression was, I had my impression of Russia, and let's just say I knew a lot about Russia before I was offered the job. So they knew how I felt, and they felt I would be a good bastion of American interest, let's just say that. And so President Trump came with his wife. We went to President Niinistő's residence for breakfast. They entertained the American team. That lasted an hour and a half. And President Trump had never met President Niinistö in person. And so that was interesting. And they talked about a number of things. In particular, they talked about the environment. That conversation was started by President Niinistö. Perhaps you'll ask me something later about environmental issues and between our two countries. And the question turned to the meeting that was going to come up, the one-on-one between the two presidents, and then the press conference. And of course, President Putin was late to everything. It's his style. It's showing his command position, I guess, or Napoleonic complex. But my impression of the meeting and watching it, and I was sitting in the front row with the secretary and the chief of staff, and John Bolton, and 6 or 8 of us there. And from here to the wall right there, which is, the camera can't see it, but a distance of maybe 20, 25 feet, and they were on a slightly raised dais. And I'm looking at the camera, so 20 or 25 feet away, where there was President Putin. And I think that meeting and some other things surrounding it, which activities within Finland I'm not going to talk about. And in particular, one thing that we Americans and the West, specifically NATO, the one area where I was instructed in reasonable detail is the American position on NATO is the door will always be open for Finland to join NATO. And my first interview with the Helsinki Summit was the question was put, what advice do you have for Finland about joining NATO? And I had my answer. The United States of America is not in the business of advising Finland what it should do on this or this is for the government and the people of Finland to decide. But the door is open, it will remain open. And now we all know that Finland has walked through the door, thank God. So.
Now they just have to get Sweden through, right?
One would hope.
Yeah, and I mean that whole Helsinki Summit, and it's really interesting to hear your the perspective of someone who was there, right, when both presidents showed up and having to prepare and probably dealing with what came after that to the point we are now, where Finland is in NATO. Probably one of the biggest changes since you've left your post there in Finland, that they are now part of NATO, and that the public really changed their opinion. When you were there, the public opinion was not favorable of NATO, and now that you've left, of course, public opinion skyrocketed from that. So how do you see that change?
A little sidebar here. When President Niinistö met with President Trump in the White House on October the 2nd, when the Finnish entourage came in, and there was a young lady sitting to the right of your president. And she was the Minister of Transportation and Communications. She was sitting to the right of the president sitting to the right of the president of Finland. Kirsti Kalpi was sitting to President Niinistő's left. I was wondering, who is she? And at a point in time, President Trump looked at President Niinistö and said, as only President Trump could say, "So how much are you going to charge me for an icebreaker?" And the answer was, I think, somewhere from President Niinistö, somewhere between 225 and 250 million. And they chatted about it a little bit. And then slight pause, and President Trump said, in his own inimical style, okay, so how much are you going to charge me for 5 of them? Silence. And so while President Niinistö was reflecting, the young lady to his right started speaking about a deal for multiple icebreakers. And at the end of the meeting, when I was formally introduced to her, and we talked about it, we said, when we go back to Finland, let's have a meeting, come over to the residence, bring your team, we'll have a nice lunch, and we'll talk to the parameters, possible parameters of a deal on icebreaker. She said, fine, let's do that. Yeah, so that was October the 2nd, maybe November 18th, 19th, somewhere in there. She came and had the meeting. It went splendidly, and I think about 3 weeks later, she was named the Prime Minister of Finland. And we had a very good relationship, and she, as you know, became, segueing into the last question about NATO, she became a large proponent of a Finnish ascendancy of joining NATO. Suffice it to say, I think it was about 3 days before the Finnish population was uniformly, over a period of time, long time, some number of years, always the majority do not join. And I think it was 3 days before Putin and did his stunt, his invasion of Ukraine, that there was a poll in Finland, and I think on that poll, it was the first time that a majority of Finns, I think it was 53% or something, voted and polled in favor of joining NATO. And then, of course, the invasion took place, and most people said, well, something's going to happen. There are too many soldiers coming to the border. They're not there for getting in line to come to Finnish saunas, although that's a good reason to get in line.
It's really fascinating to hear about that time with considering where we're at with NATO now, that you got to be there, and a presidential visit while you're ambassador, of course, is like you said, not very common, and to have a summit is even more unique. So I think you really have experience to share that, and thank you for sharing with us. I'll have one more question for you to close it up. What can Americans learn from Finns, and what can Finns learn from Americans or the United States?
Let me be very clear about this. There are a lot of Finns in the United States of America, and this showed, without going into the weeds, the value of immigration on an international, across the ocean. That's not a popular topic of a lot of people on my part. It's not a popular topic of a lot of people, but there is value of exposing cultures and having opportunities. It's one thing the Russians never did with the Helsinki Accords, allowing freedom of movement, protection of borders. The Finns came to the United States in great numbers, have been, not just the ones that I've enumerated, but on many fronts. And I would say, in particular, we haven't talked about education, but the Americans have a lot to learn yet about education from the Finns, and quite frankly, some of American things. And in that regard, I particularly enjoyed, my wife Susie and I particularly enjoyed becoming involved with the Fulbright program, which was extremely important. And when I arrived in Finland, on my desk was a pack of papers I'm pointing to about 1 inch and maybe a quarter high. About half of those papers dealt with one subject: the remains and the artifacts of indigenous Americans then reposing in the basement of the museum. I called everybody together. I said, what is this? In 1891, some of you may know, I'm going to tell you if you don't, or I'm going to tell you if you do. A Swedish archaeologist came to America, particularly the southwestern United States, in the Four Corners area, the Four Corners being the corners where Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah meet. I got all that right, and excavated some graves in the area that is now a national park, the Mesa Verde National Park. In fact, took them back to Sweden long story short, they were subsequently transferred to a Finnish gentleman and later made it to the basement. And I said, I called my team together, said, before I go home, they're going home. They being 4 complete bodies and partial bodies, 8 skulls and others, of 16 more. And they knew from testing that there were a total of 20 separate, the remains of 20 separate individuals. And it took a while to get the, took me a while to understand why the hesitancy was to transfer these remains out of the basement back to the United States. And particularly since I'd been with my family, one of my sons and his kids, we'd been up to the north of Finland to visit the president, I guess, of the Sami Council or House. And she spent a couple of hours with us telling us about the Sami people and what was going on. I made the mistake, bad joke, of asking her how many reindeer she had, which, yeah, which was like asking Bill Gates what his liquid net worth is. But anyway, there was then, I think, about 2,000 items in the museum that had originated from the Sami culture, and the Sami people wanted them back. And I think a large part of the hesitancy about returning these bodies and artifacts to America was the precedent that was set, well, like, why can't we do this? And there came a point in time after we got them back, I was working alongside the transfer to us, the negotiation, which I was not a part of, between the museum and the Finnish government about that. But suffice it to say, when did I know for sure that they were coming back? September the 29th, about the 5th inning of a baseball game, Sunday afternoon in Washington, D.C., the last game of the year, the Nationals versus Cleveland. Your president and I were sitting behind home plate in the area that was cleared out around us. The owner of the team lives right above me. And Thursday, President Niinistö had been in New York for UNGA, for the United Nations General Assembly. And on Thursday, I got a call in Helsinki, and he said, we have an issue. What? Because I knew he was coming to Washington. I said, what's the issue? He said, President Niinistö has decided that he's coming to Washington. He was going to go home for the weekend. So he's going to be in Washington over the weekend. What's he going to do? I said, call him and tell him I'll take him to a baseball game. And we were on a secure, in the room. And everybody laughed. I said, I'm not laughing. Call him and ask him. Well, guess what? He said, yes. And I said, whom do you want to go with? Whom do you want to go with? He said, no, just us. So we went. And so about the 5th inning, I finally got up to my sisu, personal sisu, up to a level where I could ask. I said, Mr. President, how's it looking for getting this done before Wednesday, or to make an announcement on Wednesday? And he said, actually, Bob, we're just not going to be able to get everything done and tied up before Wednesday. This is how I recall it. And I said to him, talking a little bit out of school, as long as it gets done, Mr. President, that's all I care about. I'm a little heartbroken. I was teary-eyed. I'm probably going to get teary-eyed when I tell you the end of the story. As long as it gets done, that's all I care about. This is really important. He said, I know it is, and it's going to get done. Don't worry about it. And so we went on. And by the way, he wanted American hot dogs and beer at the game. He wanted to wear jeans and a polo shirt, all of which 4 boxes were checked. And so on that Thursday, there were like 4 teams vying for one spot in the playoffs. And one team, I think, had to lose 3 games over the weekend. The 2 teams had to lose 2 to particular people, and Washington had to run the whatever. If you believed all those things were going to happen, you should have gone to Las Vegas and put down about 10 grand. But anyway, by the time we went to the game on Sunday, the one team had lost their games, the other 2 teams had lost to the right team. By the time we sat down to get the first beer and a hot dog, Washington was in the playoffs. Whether we won or lost, we won, thank God. And then But he said it's not going to be done. And we parted about 6 p.m. And I think about 11 a.m. or noon the next day, a messenger walks into my office with a folder. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I don't know what it is. I just deliver." And it was the resolution confirming the deal. How from Sunday at 6 p.m. Washington time to 6 or 7 p.m. Helsinki time. I think Finland spun up the jet engines to get this done. And on Wednesday, my wife and I and 3 representatives from the museum, we ultimately took them back, collected the remains and the funerary objects, and took them back to Durango, and when we landed in the United States, American Airlines, you've seen this when American troops come home in coffins and flag draped. It was all there. They were returned home from whence they should never have been taken. But on Wednesday, when the 2 presidents had a press conference, and I'm done, 60 seconds. Yeah. When they had their press conference, and in the meeting before, President Niinistö was very nice when they were talking about this, and he said, "The ambassador to Trump, I want to compliment him for what he did." And President Trump said, "Thank you for your comment. Thank you again, Mr. Ambassador." And then we went to the press conference. You can watch this. You can leave here tonight and go watch it on TV if you want. And they had their press conference. You know what I'm going to say? And right at the end of the press conference, which began with all the reporters in the East Wing, yelling and screaming, acting like they usually do, and it got to the point where President Trump said, "Hey, the president of," he didn't say "hey," President Niinistö right here. Why don't you ask him some questions while he's here? And anyway, so at the end, President Niinistö said, "I want to thank the ambassador for his involvement in the return of these Indian remains, and I thank you." And President Trump started talking. He said, "What the president is referring to is what's been going on for, I think, probably then a year and a half or something, this long process, and it's involved," and he stopped talking. And I was in the front row with my wife and the vice president. No relation, by the way, but our wives, we were all good friends. And President Trump stopped. And he said, "Actually, the ambassador is right here. Mr. Ambassador, why don't you come up here and tell everybody what happened?" I'm like, I thought Secretary Pompeo was bad with 3 weeks. With 15 seconds as I told my wife, it took me 15 seconds to get my derriere, out of the chair while I tried to figure out what my opening sentence would be, because I knew if I could get through the opening sentence, I could get through the rest of it. So that was my brief moment on national and some international news things, and making the New York Times and a bunch of papers. The Indian tribes, I could talk about that process. I'm not going to, because I'm over the 1 minute. Suffice it to say, there were 26 affected tribes, and they had agreed that the remains would not be returned unless there was unanimity of where they were going to be buried. And I figured out a way, and I will take credit for this. I figured out a way to make that work and to get the bodies back. And it started by getting the 26 tribes to agree that 4 tribes, the Zia, the Zuni, the Yakama, and the Hopi, would be the repatriating tribes. And if they agreed to do something with us, that was it. And that was it. It worked.
I'm kind of speechless just at how, you have these 2 really huge milestone moments that are so related. not related to each other really, but are so related to us back here in the U.S. And who would have thought there would have been kind of a Finnish story even with Native American remains? I mean, I think you're right that most people probably don't know about that, but when they hear that, it's just such a fascinating story. So I want to thank you for your care in that and for helping get that done. That's really a great story. So Ambassador Pence, I wanted to say thank you so much from Finlandia Foundation National. This has been a thrill for us, and we hope that we can stay in touch going forward. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I hope you found it as interesting as I did, and look forward to much more. Thank you so much, Ambassador, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank the foundation, really.